The Bookshop is a 1978 novel by the English author Penelope Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald was born in 1916. As a young woman, she gained a first at Oxford, then worked at the BBC. She married during World War II, but her husband, after a distinguished record in the army, became an alcoholic, and they endured periods of extreme hardship, including homelessness. Nevertheless, it wasn't all adversity. They started a literary journal in which several distinguished authors, including J.D. Salinger and Norman Mailer, gained their first UK publication, and in 1979 she won the Booker Prize. Nowadays, she's widely regarded as one of the most important British writers of the second half of the 20th century, which is doubly impressive in that she didn't start writing novels until she was in her 60s. She died in the year 2000 at the age of 83. This review contains spoilers. The Bookshop was her second novel. It's about an early middle-aged widow called Florence Green, who opens a bookshop in a remote coastal village in Suffolk, and who believes, as she puts it in chapter 9, that surely you have to succeed if you give everything you have. The business eventually fails, however, mainly thanks to the spite of the local grandee, a wealthy, ambitious and pretentious woman called Violet Gamart, who's used to getting her own way and to whom Florence refuses to defer, partly because she sees through her. Fitzgerald herself called The Bookshop a short novel with a sad ending. The earliest reviews were mostly too subdued. Given that it's only just over 155 pages long, it says a lot. Behind the gentle humour, it's a searing critique of British society. Mrs. Gamart is a well-connected socialite with a large house, but she's insecure. She can't match Mr. Brundish, for example, an aristocratic recluse who has nothing socially to prove and who openly despises her affectations. Mr. Brundish warms to Florence, but his long isolation makes friendship difficult, and in the end, he dies. It's often said that capitalism is fair because when an individual takes significant risks, invests a lot of money, and works hard, he or she deserves to be amply rewarded. That's undoubtedly correct, but the Bookshop arguably gives a better picture of the usual state of affairs. You take the risks, you do the work, then when you've created your market, and markets are nearly always created as much as discovered, someone unimaginative turns up whose wealth and power dwarf yours, and who opens a bigger, slicker, copycat enterprise next door. So in the end, Florence does all the work, but Mrs. Gamart and her friends reap most of the benefits. They do so through a very British conspiracy of wealth, politics. Mrs. Gamart's MP nephew sponsors a parliamentary bill, one of whose ramifications is that Florence must be evicted, and bureaucratic indifference. One of the Bookshop's themes is that in a society like Britain, outsiders usually can't win, partly because the capitalist myth is just that, a myth. In practice, the establishment will all too often close ranks against any perceived incursion. But it's much more than simply a social parable. There's a strong sense of place. Fitzgerald herself worked in a bookshop in the same county in 1957, and she obviously developed a profound feel for the locality. And the characters are not only well drawn, but somehow emblematic of common British types. The vain young BBC executive, Milo North, to give the best example, is a particularly good representation of a certain kind of unreliable intellectual. I've more or less exhausted my stock of spoilers now, so I might as well end by revealing that there's a poltergeist. It doesn't play any part in directing events, but it's there and it won't go away. And that's definitely not insignificant. I'll leave you to decide what it means.